Corporate worship is a critical part of a believer's experience.
Worship needs to evolve with new technologies and in new circumstances.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here is your host and moderator.
Welcome, viewers. Thank you for joining us. My name is Andrea Luxton. I'm today's moderator. I'm also the president of Andrews University in Michigan. We have an interesting conversation ahead, and I'd like you to meet our panelists.
I'm Bishop Michael Olson, and I serve as the Roman Catholic Bishop of the Diocese of Fort Worth.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rabbi Dan Levin. I serve as Senior Rabbi at Temple Bethel of Boca Raton, Florida.
I'm Tom Plumley. I'm the Senior Minister of First Christian Church, just off Sundance Square in downtown Fort Worth, Texas. We're a part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
I'm Tony Matthews, and I serve in the area of missions, evangelism, and church planting for a network of churches in the state of Texas.
Welcome, team. Thank you very much for being here today. And here is our topic. In a March 2022 article, the Harvard team from the Human Flourishing Program analyzed a recent Gallup poll. They noted some intriguing conclusions on the factors that impact life satisfaction. According to the poll, a better predictor of life satisfaction than educational attainment or even income was religious service attendance. 67% of weekly service attenders reported being, quote, very satisfied, whereas that was true for only 51% of the nation as a whole and for only 61% of those making at least $100,000 a year. In church attenders, destructive behavior appeared substantially less, while positive attitudes such as increased generosity rated significantly higher. During the pandemic, many faith communities moved to more remote services, and many communities report a drop in attendance, whether remote or in person, even as places of worship open up. With this, there appears to have been a move to celebration of personal faith rather than corporate faith. Yet Hebrews 10:25 exhorts the congregation to not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another. So with all this in mind, the panelists are asked to consider at least the following questions. First of all, is there something important about physical community and worship that cannot be replaced by remote forms of engagement in worship, however good those might be? Secondly, do you think the pendulum in the United States has swung too much in favor of personal faith and worship rather than corporate faith and worship experiences? And finally, what are the barriers to effective and meaningful corporate worship beyond those related to the pandemic? Here are questions, and back to those who began our conversation to continue.
Yeah, it's good being here, and I think this is a great topic. COVID, as was mentioned in the opening statement by our moderator, really impacted a lot of worshipers. And our church shut down, as many churches did, and we went remote. We went online. Of course, I preached to the camera in a small room, and then we graduated to a camera in the empty sanctuary, and then we started returning after a significant amount of time. And from a personal standpoint, it was tough for me to preach and not have the experience of having that community and just worshiping together. The Hebrews passage that's mentioned, the verse before that, in verse 24, it tells us to stimulate one another. And I think it's critical for people of faith to gather. I think the whole gathering aspect of worshiping is important, and even beyond worshiping, the fellowshipping part. And the Scripture refers to us as the body of Christ. The body. We have different parts. The Holy Spirit, as I understand it, gives us different gifts, and these gifts are for not just ourselves, but it's to edify others. And when you remove that from the equation, I think growth and edification are lacking. So I think it's very important for us to come back. The stats are very important, by the way. Someone making $100,000 probably won't be too, I thought that was pretty interesting, the mention of the $100,000. And by the way, I don't know about the other churches and synagogues, but early on in 2020, when the pandemic hit, our offerings actually went up. So I'm still trying to figure out, and a lot of churches are trying to figure out, what was the cause of that. And I know our Southern Baptists in Texas, the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention, we set a record last year with we gave more than ever before in the history of the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention. I want to just encourage people. I know the pandemic was very real. Many people passed away, but you just can't replace that corporate worship. It's something about that gathering that is so encouraging, inspiring, moving, edifying, and needed. And I think that's something that we should really never get away from permanently.
So I resonate so strongly, Tony, to what you were talking about. For a year we led worship from our homes, and I had a neighbor who used to tell me he liked to walk his dog on Friday nights past my house and look in the window and watch me worship my bookshelf. Because that's where I had my camera set up in my office, and you would speak and you wouldn't know whether anybody laughed at the joke you told or was moved by the message that you shared. I resonate to that so strongly. And I think the reason is because there is spirituality in gathering. It's interesting. If you read Exodus 19, there's a strange phrase that says, Israel arrived at Sinai and they camped in Sinai, and that's in the plural, Vayachanu. And then it says, Vayichan Yisrael tachat har, and Israel camped, and then they use the word in the singular. So the rabbis are like, well, wait a minute, why does it mention camping twice? Why does it mention camping plural and then singular? Well, if you've ever been camping, right, it's usually a fairly chaotic mess. I didn't know if that's just for Jews, but apparently, it's hard, right? But what would it mean if a community could camp in the singular, where you could create out of this mixed multitude this sense of oneness? And there is this sense that when Israel gathers in that oneness, that is what inspired the Holy One to connect with the oneness of Israel. And that's why as Jews, we're supposed to pray in what's called minyan. You're supposed to have a quorum of 10 people because you have to recreate that energy, or at least a semblance of it, that was at Sinai. And for Orthodox Jews, during the pandemic, they prayed outside as long as they had 10 people together because they just couldn't do it apart from other people. But at the same time, the technologies that we've explored have helped people to recast what it means to be part of community. My wife lost her mother during the pandemic, and being apart from her family as they gathered at the gravesite was horrible. At the same time, it's customary in Jewish traditions for people to gather in the homes of the mourners in what's called the 7-day period after a loss, called Shiva. It's customary to have a worship service in the home. Well, we couldn't have anyone in our home, but we did a minyan online, and there were well over 100, 200 people who had logged on to this Zoom. And these are people who would never have been a part of that minyan because they live in Chicago and in Washington and all over the country and all over the world. But we were able to feel a sense of that community by gathering online. We conducted a class before the High Holy Days, and a woman was on the class and had her camera off, and I said, oh, well, you can turn your camera on. And she said, oh, I can't. I would, but it's very late here. It's 4 a.m. I said, where are you? She says, I'm in Mauritius. So guess how big the Jewish community is in Mauritius. If you don't need, go look on a map where Mauritius is. It's an hour flight east of Madagascar, right? Yeah. But she could feel a sense of connection to our Jewish community, even though she's thousands and thousands of miles away by virtue of technology. On a Saturday morning, we have at our Torah study class people from Texas, Washington, D.C., New Jersey, and Florida, people in the room, people outside the room, and this sense of connection that people are able to maintain, especially those who, because of vulnerabilities, aren't able to gather in person. They still are able to feel that sense and warmth of community, and we have to make, I think, room for recasting what it means to gather in a communal setting.
Thank you.
Well, I think I come from a tradition, obviously, where the gathering in person is absolutely essential to our faith. And then if the only exceptions would be like if someone is sick, the obligation, or is caring for someone who is sick, or is forced under duress to work on a day or something, then they're not. The obligations of charity, of love, come before even the strict obligations of worship in that sense. But what I found is that people have come back stronger. They want to gather. Catholics have come back and they want to gather for Mass, and they appreciate being together. The other thing, though, that we discovered during the pandemic is a lot like what you said, is that I think it's made us a little more sensitive to the shut-ins who've always been there, but who are more easily overlooked, that we have a responsibility and always have had, especially for extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion, to visit the sick immediately after Mass, to go so that they can take part in the celebration by extension. Well, that gets very easily overlooked. And what also has come about for, I think, a greater sensitivity is especially funerals, where we have a very mobile society, and especially among our older members and congregants, and who live apart from their children and apart from their own siblings who've moved in with adult children, or to be closer to grandchildren, that aren't able to participate in the funeral services of their loved ones, that they can be greatly consoled by being able to be present, at least by Zoom or by live streaming. I think also what people have found, what I found, the feedback I got from people was that during the pandemic, where they're not able to attend in person, for whatever reason, they like the idea of being present to their own parish community, at least through Zoom. Now, of course, there are other people who found it more convenient. They kind of like, because you don't have to get dressed for Mass, and I'm like, spare me the details, But it's just simply that passes away. They move on to something else, and hopefully they'll come back. But I think that there is so little that we do in person anymore in our society, that I think that virtual activity or Zoom activity can go so far, but it can't ultimately replace authentic in-person human contact, even a sense of empathy. It's very hard to show empathy without that sort of physical presence, especially, for the dying and those who are sick and their loved ones. So I think the pandemic has, by God's grace, has offered us a lot of lessons and some things that can renew the way we worship as a church and the way we minister to each other.
Thank you.
The blessing that came to our community from the pandemic was many blessings, but the singularly most important one was a reaffirmation of our need to be together, our need to gather around the table. We are a fellowship that is centered at the table, and contrary to most Protestant churches, find that fellowship to to be the core of the core experience of our worship of God. And that was very difficult to recreate. We also, I guess, secondarily, we're blessed by upgrading our technology in our church greatly, so that we were able to reach out to more people in a better way than just the laptop on which I began broadcasting worship in those days. But the recreation of the experience at the table, at the Lord's table, that we are clear to call communion, has been very difficult, and really only in the past few weeks have we begun to get back to our usual traditions of the way we serve the Lord's Supper. We serve communion to each other, but it is that communing, because we believe that we are not born into individuality. We are born into community. And we cry about it, we grouse about it from the very beginning. We wail in the delivery room about those folks around us that have all of a sudden become a spat on our bottom. But that community is there for us nonetheless, serving us, growing us, nurturing us, teaching us, disciplining us, but pushing us beyond ourselves out to grow and to be more than we are. And that's what corporate worship does. It puts us in touch with something beyond who we are. It helps us to touch each other in a different way. And that's the beauty of corporate worship, and that's the thing that's been a challenge for all of us to learn how to do in the sort of distanced way that we had to do it during pandemic time.
Yeah, our folks, we started off not taking communion because we weren't gathering, but then it got to a point where our members, when I was pastoring North Garland Baptist Fellowship, it got to a point where they were saying, listen, we're in the house, we have to have communion. So we gathered in the parking lot, and we had some theological discussions around the virtue of taking communion in the parking lot, but the parking lot was just jam-packed. It was such a source of encouragement to our people. We were online. They were able to view me praying over the elements, and our deacons distributed the juice and the crackers or the bread, I should say. And it was just I was surprised. And every first Saturday of the month, the parking lot was jammed packed. And so that was one of the good things that came out of it. And now that church is back, it's really nice.
I think one of the things that I saw, in addition to all of the values that you're talking about, and I think you said it so well about the values of coming together, is that our community pulls from a very wide geographic area. And it was what we would call Shabbostic, right? It feels like the Sabbath. For many of our families, it doesn't feel that way when you have to get home from work quickly, get in the car, drive 40 minutes across town to get there to have corporate worship. And during the pandemic, they said, hey, you know what? It actually felt more like the Sabbath to be able to sit around the table with my family and put the service on an iPad and to sit relaxed at home than it was to rush to get there. Sometimes you can have two different ways of trying to construct holy experience. And we have to make room, I think, for the allowance that there may be more than just one way, that we have to maybe realize there's a right way for some and new paths for others.
Great. Let's take a break.
We hope you're enjoying today's program. If you'd like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the vision and history of the program, and we invite you to become a ministry partner, explore our Town Hall Estates healthcare facilities, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, we look forward to receiving your letters. You may write us at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. If you have a prayer request, please send it to prayerrequest@americanreligious.org. Thank you for writing and thank you for watching. Now, back to today's closing statements.
Welcome back to our conversation on the power of corporate worship. And here are our closing statements. Bishop.
The retired Archabbot of St. Meinrad Archabbey in Indiana, Father Lambert Riley, once said, "To live is to annoy, and to live is to be annoyed." And I think that same could be true for corporate worship, is that there's a lot of things that are annoying about corporate worship. Babies crying. The babies are annoyed at not being able to run freely and sometimes being constrained. People are annoyed or distracted by others. And yet in that annoyance, there's a sense of really knowing that the world doesn't center around us, and neither does God. In a sense, corporate worship helps us to know that we are made in the image and likeness of God, and God is not made in our own image and likeness, which is always our temptation as fallible human beings.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Bishop. I always tell parents that I've never minded their children crying. The people around them sometimes do, but they always come and apologize to me, and they never need to do that. Folks, corporate worship is important. So if I'm to leave you with any words today, it would be get up off your couch, put down your remote, get some sort of footwear on your feet, and bring your walker or your wheelchair or whatever you need to get yourself there, but find a nice, intimate, hospitable congregation and come to worship something more profound than your local team, more reliable than your dearest family member, and more challenging than, well, anything.
One final thing I want to add is that, and I noticed this during the pandemic, certainly 2020 without a doubt, when most of our folks were home and a lot of other churches were home. And that's when we saw a lot of fights on social media because of the climate in the country. And I think when we gather and worship, we have this built-in accountability to each other and to our God. It's hard to sit next to someone and worship, the same God, and then to turn around the same day and fight with them on social media. When you don't see someone and when you're not in their presence, it seems like it was easier for folks to just attack people, believers, Christians, God-fearing people, online and to sever relationships. So I think the whole accountability aspect is built into our gathering. It's a plus when we can come together, because I'm going to think twice about insulting, hurting the person who I'm worshiping with, and I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And so I think that's really important. I like what one of my friends said with social media. He said, well, we saw during the pandemic a mouse behind a mouse in their attacks with each other. But go back to church, as Brother Tom mentioned. It's the best thing for us.
So I was speaking to somebody who, there's a custom in Jewish tradition that you say a particular prayer to honor those who have died at least once a day. And how doing that apart and alone was so alienating, that you needed to be in community of other people who could comfort you or who you knew that were walking that path with you. But one of the things I also noticed was how you can construct community in a much broader fashion using technology than we ever imagined. When we conducted our Passover Seder, and we realized that there were hundreds and hundreds of people who were watching literally from all over the world. And in the little chat, we would say, hello from Peru, hello from Montana, hello from my hospital bed. I didn't know that I was going to be able to even observe a Seder. This has brought such joy to my life. You're allowed to, I think, through technology, take people who are atomized from each other and make them feel that sense of connectivity, of that communal embrace that they wouldn't necessarily have been able to enjoy. But I think we do have to be reminded that the discovery of God is not found all by ourselves. The discovery of God is found through community. And just as when the Israelites gathered at Mount Sinai, they were able to meet God in the collective whole, so do we, I think, better encounter God when we gather as a collective whole as well.
Thank you. What an excellent conversation today. I think that on both sides, I think one of the important conversations has been this discussion about what we have learned. We've learned so much in the pandemic, how to reach out and connect in new ways. And of people that are on the fringes who maybe had not been able to connect for various reasons were able to. I had the ability to be able to speak in Northern Ireland, in a church in Northern Ireland. I was able to speak to a church in London, one in the South Pacific, and so on, which I wouldn't have flown there just to speak, and it was a great way, and a way of people connecting with my past as well. So I think all that is something for us not to lose. But yet there is, there's the worship surfers that were developed, right? Let's just keep surfing, and I don't like that speaker so much today. I'll go, oh, look, I can go over here. Oh, this week I can go over here. And that disconnect from a home, of a community home for worship, I think has been a loss to people. So for those of you who are viewing out there, we would encourage you, find that, if you haven't done so already, find that place where you feel, yes, this is a place where I can give as I worship, as well as receive as I worship, and be an active part of a worship community. The Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. So now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.